Okay. Decoding the stones is the title of this presentation. What it means. From earlier antiquity to contemporary times, symbols and symbolism have been and are ways of expressing the human spirit, because their existence is not regulated by external facts, as, for example, historical ones, but amounts to a kind of permanent necessity for human beings. Symbols have not been extinct as a mode of thinking and contemplating in any historical period of humanity, but only temporarily put aside, thus remaining deeply rooted in human consciousness. According to Mircea Eliade, the known Mircea Eliade, among ancient peoples, symbolism did not refer only to spiritual, transcendental realities, because in those people's perception, in those times, the spiritual was not separated from the material, but the two were considered complementary. Theosophy now teaches that the divine is an abstract, invisible, and ineffable principle, a universal principle, the root of all, from which everything emanates and to which everything returns when the grand cycle of existence ends. Therefore, what could be the purpose of the religious artifacts of antiquity and our more recent epochs? Why are they considered necessary by some? Could they be symbols of the divine? Why is religious art using human form when sculpturing statues dedicated to a deity, or when producing holy icons and frescoes, paintings with images as, for example, Christian saints, Virgin Mary, and baby Jesus, archangels, etc.? Let us see. It is known that our brain perceives the visible world via the external appearance and the impressions emitted by physical bodies and various objects. These stimulate our sight, and thus thoughts and images are formed and imprinted in our mind. And when the relative images or thoughts are repeatedly formed in it, they produce a permanent presentation of the idea concerned. Analogy cooperates with symbolism, as does universal rapport. Therefore, the illustration of the divine in statues, holy icons, and frescoes imprints the mind with higher ideas. This way, there is always an image or a thought ready for use in our mind, which can help us to contemplate or meditate and feel the divine spark in us, the spiritual ego, a higher self, who knows but cannot transmit this knowledge to our lower self as it is obstructed by the limitations of the material realms. Referring to ancient religious art, the Neoplatonist Porphyry says that our ancestors sculptured statues and built temples as reminders of the existence of the gods, and for those who visit them to be able to devote some of their time to contemplate or pray to the god with pure heart. Now, the Greek word for statue is agalma, and it is said that its initial meaning was ornament. For example, Orpheus, the mystic, in his hymns calls the moon statue of the night, as it is an ornament in the night sky. Plato, in his work Epinomis, writes that we should consider the statues as illustrations of the gods, and we should do so since the sculptors of these are not naive, neither men of less value. Again, Xenophanes, another ancient Greek philosopher, said that the form which is given to the statues is no other than the way in which human perception can conceive divine ideas. Also that they express the human adoration towards marvel and beauty. One such example was the well-known but now lost statue of god Zeus in ancient Olympia, made by the famous ancient Greek sculptor Phidias, who had also made the statue of the goddess Athena once existing within the Parthenon temple in Athens, Greece. As Plotinus writes in one of his Enneads, the art exhibited in the material work derives from an art yet higher. Thus Phidias, the sculptor, wrote the Zeus upon no model among things of sense, but by apprehending what form Zeus must take if he chose to become manifest to sight. The Greek word agalma, which I mentioned a minute ago, derives from the Greek verb agalome, which means to rejoice oneself, to feel exalted. In this sense, a religious statue was and is meant to generate joy and a feeling of exaltation within the person who stands in front of it, and thus to somehow connect one with the archetypical world. Obviously, there was and still is a difference between those statues which show actual personalities who once lived in the physical world and the statues or other stone artifacts which illustrate deities and relative ideas. The first statues in all cultures of antiquity were made out of wood. Some of them were magnificent pieces of art, sometimes curved or chiseled on large tree trunks, as is seen in some northern countries. Others were made out of cut branches and smaller parts of woods. Here we see some of the Scandinavian ones, the first ones. Later, clay was manufacturing statuettes of various sizes, which people kept for domestic size use, like the Syrian teraphim and this one from Africa. Stones such as granite and also metal were also used for statues like the ones we see in the ancient Egyptian temples, the Hindu ones, and ancient Greece, even though marble was the main material used by the ancient Greek artists, like these statues here. Stone was also used by the indigenous people of Central and South America, as for example, the Mayan, the Aztec, the Toltec peoples were using these. A very important metal statue, example of a metal statue, is the one of the charioteer of Plato's Phaedrus. This charioteer is supposed to be our higher self, the one who guides the horses of our lower mind. It is our divine self. And the idea is similar to that of the Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, the charioteer of the Bhagavad Gita, our divine self, who guides the horses of our lower personality and our lower self. I was talking about before of Plato's Phaedrus, and the idea of this charioteer, who is the higher self, a higher ego, is similar to the one of the Bhagavad Gita with Krishna, the charioteer. All right.
Now it makes sense.
So okay, so far so good. Sorry about that. I don't know why. Anyway, so I was about to ask, are statues and other religious artifacts necessary to some people as pieces of worship? It seems that in ancient times, as well as in more recent ones, the non-initiated needed and still need up to a point the personalization of transcendental powers and ideas in whatever form this might have acquired then or still do today according to the different cultures and religions. And this is because many people had not then and have not yet today developed the capability of conceiving the ineffable and the invisible in other ways. So the initiates of the mystery schools decided to illustrate divine ideas in statues and other artifacts, such as frescoes, by using mainly the human body as a template, since, as Porphyry says again, it is absolutely natural for the statues to have the human form, because the human species is considered as the most beautiful of all God's creatures and an image of the God. In the same spirit are the words of the Greek philosopher and historian Dion Chrysostom, who writes, "No one, whether a sculptor or a painter, is capable to illustrate the nous or spirit and the prudence, because these are invisible powers and entirely unknown to all. Therefore, the human form is used, which we consider as the vehicle of prudence and the logos, or the word, and we relate it with the God because there is not a temple more appropriate than this. We seek to illustrate the unseen and non-virtual by the seen and depicted. We use the human form as a symbol of that power." The artists now, who were summoned by the initiates of old, and worked on wood, stone, clay, marble, mosaics, and frescoes, produced various pieces of religious art. Some of them might very well be considered as more magnificent than more recent artifacts, and bearing a beauty which cannot be seen in contemporary art. They show accurate knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, anatomy, spiritual development, and wisdom, which prevail in the schools of mystery. Often, but not always, those pieces were made under the guidance and the supervision of the initiates. They present a mystery language capable of transmitting spiritual information directly to the subconscious of those who stand in front of them, provided they are pure and have open heart and mind. The symbolism and the deeper meaning of these illustrations were always explained during the ancient mysteries, of course, and this teaching was part of the initiation process and also a first revelation of the true, occult and particular energy of every depicted deity or divine idea. The purpose of it was to guide the mind of the initiated and to present the most abstract and inner ideas to them via images which provoke an aesthetic emotion. However, it was not possible to reveal the truth to the profane, since, to use the well-known biblical words, it would be as if casting pearls before swine that would crush them and then turn against those who threw them. In the same manner, in ancient Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries were divided into the lesser ones for the non-initiated and the grand ones for the initiates. Also, Pythagoras' disciples were required to take the sacred oath to never reveal to the ignorant the truths which were taught in his mystery school. And again, the Gnostics, and even Christ, used to talk to the masses in parables, revealing the truth only to their disciples. Furthermore, the initiates of old warned their disciples that an image is not a reality, but merely the objectification of a subjective idea. The images of the gods were not designed to be objects of worship, but were to be regarded just as emblems or reminders of invisible powers and principles. Similarly, the human body must not be considered as the individual himself, but as the house of the individual, in the same manner that the temple is considered as the house of God. In a state of grossness and perversion, a human body is the tomb or prison of a divine priesthood. But in a state of unfoldment and regeneration, it is the house or sanctuary of the deity by whose creative power it was fashioned. In other words, our spiritual soul. Thus, the artifacts were displayed to the non-initiated to help them approach the meaning of the divine order according to their own individual capacity. Since, as the Neoplatonist Porphyry once more points out, those who pay due homage to the gods do not believe that the god can exist within the wood or the stone or the copper the statues are made of, nor that if a part of a statue were broken off, this would diminish the god's power. During the first years of the Christian era now, the ancient statues were considered scandalous and rather demonic images, and so their existence caused problems to the first Christians, who believed that the heathens worshipped idols. This triggered reactions by some philosophers against the Christian clergy, who urged their followers to destroy all ancient statues and temples, in other words, to destroy everything related to the so-called idol worship. Thus, we read on Celsus' work, they do not want to see temples, altars, and statues, but unless they are fools, who among them believes that these are the deities themselves, when they are nothing else than dedications to the divine depicted in a human form? They claim that the statues are not dedicated to gods but to demons. Can't they understand that whatever exists in this world is under the divine law and subjective to the divine law? The initial Christian attitude against the statues changed later on, and so the church started to use religious images within its temples and elsewhere. The Eastern Orthodox Church developed the painting of holy icons and frescoes, figuring divine ideas such as the great architect, personages like the Virgin Mary and Jesus, archangels, and saints. On the other hand, the Catholic and the Anglican churches started using mainly statues. In more recent ages, religious icons, frescoes, statues, and other forms of presentation and drawings were and still are used for the same purpose. Such are the statues and frescoes of the ancient gods, as well as those of the Renaissance and the Byzantine art, that is, the holy icons we see in churches, temples, and monasteries. Especially beautiful are the paintings of Domenico Theotokopoulos, the well-known El Greco. We also meet other forms of art like the ones we find in mosques, which are illustrations of higher cosmic archetypes depicting and emitting the virtue of the archetypical world. They are a reminiscence and a reminder of the deification of highly developed souls, and they can become portals to the spiritual world. Most of them are exhibited mainly in sacred and consecrated places and can be considered as silent, sacramental hymns to divine ideas. They can also become a way of spiritual connection between the human and the divine worlds. And those who know and can read the holy iconic language are capable of deriving spiritual knowledge of the highest importance, provided they are open to it. Religious artifacts emit such beauty that one might feel it has descended from the heaven world to this one by inspiring the artist. They all speak to our psyche, to the soul or the sensitive person, producing in us the feeling which is known as bliss. The divine inspires different people, taking the specific form which suits best their culture or level of spiritual development. For example, the ancient Greeks praised beauty in youth, and these elements were used widely in ancient Greek art. The dark-skinned people of Africa, Central and South America worshipped the Black Madonna and the Black Jesus, while in ancient Egypt, the Black Athena was worshipped along with the other gods of the Egyptian pantheon. In the Far East, the statues and frescoes of their deities, as well as those of Buddha and the Bodhisattvas, have facial characteristics like those of the people belonging to the Eastern nations. Designs like the Tao symbol, the Hindu and Tibetan swastikas, the mandala, and others were, still are, also used to decorate temples, sacred places, and monasteries of East Asian cultures, while the cross is the main element which decorates Christian churches and monasteries, and its form was also used in the architecture of churches built according to the Byzantine style, which is a cross. In Muslim mosques, where images of the divine in human form are not permitted, Geometric shapes and flowery designs decorate the walls. According to the Sufis, this function is points of prayer and meditation for the common faithful, while for those who know the hidden symbolism, they are only a veil of the divine. The North and South American Indians use images from the animal kingdom in their houses and temples, and on other items too, as did the ancient Greeks in their everyday life on pottery, etc. Also, round shapes and several forms of the cross, which is said to be the most ancient of all shapes, were used in North and South American Indian cultures to illustrate the powers of the unseen. Now, the religious mode of painting and sculpture, especially in older times, could only be compared to the music, which transcends and supervenes all worlds and meaning. Undoubtedly, when standing in front of such a statue, a fresco, or a holy icon illustrating a divine idea, we feel small and insignificant. However, if we allow ourselves to be connected to the deep symbolism they depict, it will be like entering the spiritual waters of our higher self, our inner being, and perhaps something even higher. On the other hand, those who are driven by blind faith and interpret what they see as literal and become attached to the external form unconsciously degrade the inner meaning in their mind, and unfortunately, if one tells them the actual truth, they accuse a person of being atheistic, paranoiac, and deeply insulting. The literal interpretation of holy icons was the reason for the religious war on icons which took place during the Byzantine days between those who were against the illustration of the divine on frescoes and those who were in favor of them. In support of the latter, the Greek Orthodox monk Nikephoros had written that the holy icons express the silence of the divine. They emit an ineffable mystery which transcends the being. In their silence, they incessantly praise goodness. Theosophy again teaches that praying or meditating is a mystery, an occult process, which can take us to a spiritual transmutation and become for us a philosopher's stone, or that which transmutes lead to gold. However, these words quoted from Elena Blavatsky in The Key of Theosophy do not refer to a prayer in blind faith with so many words repeated externally as a petition to an unknown God, to an extra cosmic and therefore finite God, as she says, but to the Father who is in secret, as given by Matthew. Grant us, she says in the same work, our postulate that God is a universally diffused and infinite principle. And how can man alone escape from being soaked through by and in the deity? Theosophy characterizes blind faith as a human weakness and teaches that the true faith is the gnosis, the knowledge which Pythagoras explained as the gnosis of the gods, that is, to know things as they are. The true faith is the pistis of the Greeks, or faith according to the Greeks, based on knowledge, whether supplied by the evidence of the physical or the spiritual senses, as she says again. Because between faith on authority and faith on one's spiritual intuition, there is a very great difference. To sum up, I will say that religious icons, frescoes, statues can be considered as symbols, and they certainly are. A symbol reveals the essential unity of many levels of reality and can present an idea which is unapproachable by the finite mind through the ordinary means of knowledge. Symbols can become openings to other worlds and modes of communication between the various planes, enabling one to travel to all levels of reality. Universal rapport can make a symbol function as a mirror of the illustrated image. It can reflect not only the form we see, but somehow it can also capture the essence of the idea, as do the paintings of El Greco. At this point, I will ask once more, what could be the purpose of these artifacts in antiquity and our more recent epochs? I believe that the final answer to this might very well be the words of Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schilling, who says that classical art aimed at the inclusion of the infinite in the finite. Christian art sought to achieve the reverse, that is, to make the finite an allegory for the infinite. Thank you for your attention. Sorry for the trouble. And I'm thanking you with another stone symbol, a sun, which has the initials IHS, or Jesus Humanus Salvator, Jesus, the Savior of humanity. In Greek Orthodox Church, we call Jesus the Son of Righteousness. I don't know if you do the same in Anglican Church or not, or Catholic. Thank you again.